Hello there. Today I'm going to rank the warrior classes in Baldur's Gate Enhanced Edition. Now, as mentioned, these rankings are just based on my own opinion. As mentioned in the other ranking videos, I have 3 tiers that I focus on. The top tier is like the awesome tier. They are absolutely amazing classes. You're gonna be having a great time even if you're an absolute beginner. They're not necessarily always easy to use, but they give a ton of different options that make them very, very powerful. Then you're gonna have the you're gonna have fun tier, which is kind of that middle group, but they're still a lot of fun to play, and they're good for if you're just beginning and you want to kind of have a focus on what you're doing, and you just want to have a good time when you're playing. And then finally at the bottom there is the challenging tier. Now the challenging tier is based on the fact that these aren't easy classes to play with. They have a lot of disabilities. They aren't going to be as powerful later on in the game, or they have a very, very slow start. And ultimately, they're very good if you're challenging yourself, but they have a lot of limits to them. For this particular list, the emphasis is on understanding what warriors do. Warriors aim to take physical damage, and they aim to do physical damage. They aim to take more hits than anyone else, and they aim to get in either nice and close or from a distance, do more physical damage than anyone else. They may have additional roles to these 2 big things, and we'll go over those roles as well, but the big points are, again, physical damage and holding a front line. So with that, let's go ahead and begin by starting with the worst of the classes, which, sadly enough, is the Sun Soul Monk. The Sun Soul Monk, first off, it does exclusively fire damage, which, as far as the elemental damage, it's most easily resisted by opponents. They lose other monk abilities such as Stunning Fist and Quivering Palm, and they have all of the bad parts of being a monk, which I'll go into with that class, and they also lose out on other useful abilities. So unfortunately, they just don't really have much of a role, and on top of that, they exclusively do a type of damage that's easily resisted, and it's just not very good. So for that reason, the Sun Soul Monk is the worst of the warriors. The next of the warrior classes is right above them, which is the Dark Moon Monk. It's not as bad as the Sun Soul Monk, but it's still pretty bad. They can detect illusions, and some of their special abilities are pretty good. Casting Blindness and Mirror Image help to protect the monk, and they also have frost damage instead of fire damage, which is mediocre, but it's still less resisted than fire damage. But the big thing is that they lose Stunning Fist, which is really quite bad, basically taking that away from the monk. Any monk class is going to really take away their ability to save themselves. So for that reason, the Dark Moon Monk is the next lowest, or the next highest, I guess, second lowest on this list. Going backwards is the right way to do this, but it's also kind of confusing when I try to describe it. Now, third place for the weakest classes and part of the challenging tier is the Beastmaster Ranger. Now, as an ironic bit, the Beastmaster Ranger has the capability of getting more HP than anyone else in the game, because they start with a warrior's HP of 1d10 plus their constitution, plus using the spell Find Familiar and then putting their familiar in their pocket. However, even with the increased HP, they are still third worst. First and foremost, they lose all metal weapons and armor. That's just unacceptable. I understand that there's a fluff behind it. I understand that it taps into the idea of the Beastmaster from the 1980s and 1990s movies. I can appreciate that, but really, it's just not useful. It's not useful unless you're actually living out in the woods and you're kind of staying in one general area and you're fighting, waves of goons. Right, you don't have to go out for a grand adventure and face off against powerful wizards and mages and clerics and stuff like that. Beastmasters, unfortunately, they just lose so much with losing the metal weapons and armor. Animal summoning, starting at 8th level, is also very lackluster. If they started it at 1st level and they could summon it right away, have a little buddy to help them out, that'd be kind of nice. As a general note about Rangers and Paladins, they don't get as many attacks per round as fighters because they lose out on getting the 5 spots for their weapon proficiencies. That means that Rangers and Paladins have to rely on other things in order to do more damage, or they have to really go more into the role of being the defensive class versus being the offensive class. So it's a very mediocre, it takes what's a mediocre class of being a Ranger and then makes them even weaker. So that's why they're the 3rd worst. The next is the Monk. And base monks in Baldur's Gate Enhanced Edition, sadly enough, they serve no specific purpose. It breaks my heart because who doesn't want to play as like a martial artist, Dragon Ball Z-esque character who goes in and punches their opponents and shows them that their martial weapons are useless against good training and mystical chi enhancement to their own physical abilities. It's just friggin' amazing. I would love to see the Monk be a great class, but unfortunately Enhanced Edition just doesn't do it credit. Some of the big issues that the Monk faces in Baldur's Gate Enhanced Edition is that, first off, they don't have enough AC to be a good dodge tank. If they played that role, if they were able to go up into combat and basically force the opponents to miss 9 out of every 10 attacks, I think that would be really, really good. In addition, they don't have any way to make themselves immune to critical hits. They can't wear helmets, and so it makes them basically very, very squishy. They also don't do enough damage to be an offensive capability character. They can use Stunning Fist. That's good, but it's not as reliable as other classes. I can get a mage with the Wand of Paralyzation and basically have them use that Wand of Paralyzation to do the same thing as a monk can at a distance. So I just feel that the Stunning Fist, it's good, it's cool, neat, unique ability, and it's their saving grace. It's what makes the base monk a little bit better than either of its kits, but it's not as reliable as other classes. Monks do get resistances to magic and to poison and to disease. That's good, but it comes up too late to be really useful. And that leads to kind of the thing I figured out about the monk, right? Is that monks are terrible in the early game. And they're meant to be terrible in the early game. You're not supposed to play them starting at level 1. They were first introduced in Baldur's Gate 2, where you started them at level 7. And by that point, they start to become a little bit better, and then by the end of the game, they're basically just mediocre. I'm not impressed with them at all. It's really quite sad because, again, I love the fluff of them, but they're just not good. Now, I am still waiting for rogue rebalancing to actually work, and I'd love to give them another try, but sadly, monks are just a bad class, and it's very, very sad. The next two classes kind of go hand in hand, and the next class is, very interestingly enough, the Inquisitor. This is controversial, and I've heard all about how amazing the Inquisitor is because they're the ultimate anti-mage character. However, they also only have one strategy to playing the character. So the thing is, with Inquisitors, they can't cast divine spells. That is their big weakness. They can't cast buffs on themselves. They can't protect themselves except for the armor that they wear. And it's oftentimes just not enough to actually make them viable for later on in the game. They can get a ranged weapon, and they can cast Dispel Magic at twice their level in the base game. And I encourage you just to keep that at the base game, right? Don't play around with that. Don't try to weaken it. It's their only saving grace, because what they'll do is they could shut down magic in the front line, and then they could fire with their weapon and stay off the front line. It's not terrible. It's not a horrible class. It's not like the Monk or the Beastmaster Ranger, but you only have one strategy in playing this character. Otherwise, you are going to run into big problems when you try to do other things. Now, I would say, if the Inquisitor could cast some divine spells or have some limit to their divine spells rather than not be able to cast them at all, then I think the Inquisitor would be a really good class. I think it would definitely be much higher on this list, and it would probably be in the, you're going to have fun tier, but they're not quite there. So really they're a challenging character to make work. And unless you really have a good strategy or you're really kind of eager to role play it, I don't think that they're as good as people say they are. Speaking of another class that fits kind of the same mold is the Wizard Slayer. Now, I want to have this caveat. This entire list is based off of single class characters. That's the way all of these rankings are. If I were dual classing this into a thief, where their disadvantage of not being able to use magic items is just whisked away, that would be great. That would be amazing. Wizard Slayer, top of the class. But we're not taking dual class into effect, so by itself, the loss of magic items is really bad. They keep in the back, they fire at mages, and it neuters them faster than a zealous veterinarian. Okay? That's good. And they also have the innate magic resistance. That's also quite good. But this could have been better if they were allowed to access the same magic items that other classes get to get. So, Wizard Slayer, by itself, is very lackluster, and I find them not very good. Then we have the Ranger. The Ranger combines some druid abilities with their fighting abilities, and also a stealth ability. As you can see, they do a lot of different things, but they don't do any one of them amazingly well. They don't do as much damage as fighters, they don't get as defensive as paladins. Ultimately, you're a jack of all trades, but you're a master of none. And this makes the Ranger a very, kind of lackluster class. If you want to play as a good Ranger, do one of the other two kits, besides the Beastmaster Ranger. Trust me, the other two Ranger kits are coming up, one of which is right now.
Which leads me to the Stalker, which is an unfortunate name for a decent kit and the class that's going to start us in the good time tier. If the Ranger is a weird hybrid character combining 3 different classes, the Stalker gives it a little more focus and turns it into a sort of commando character. They have increased stealth and they have an emphasis on light armor. They can't use any armor heavier than studded leather. Now that doesn't sound great, but it actually does allow them to get a unique purpose in the fact that they are like a sturdier but softer hitting version of an assassin with arcane spells. True to the tier, I really think Stalkers are very fun to play, and I think you're gonna have a good time if you play as a Stalker. Next is the Kensai. Kensai is the epitome of the offensive warrior who lacks defense. They can't wear armor, so they're not gonna be able to wear anything that first off increases their AC, obviously, but also could give them potential resistances and bonuses. They do hit harder, and hitting harder and harder every 3 levels is very nice with the increased damage, increased THAC0, and increase to speed factor every 4 levels. It's very nice. And if you were dual classing, the Kensai would be a little bit higher, but I do think it can be a little bit overrated. People will say, oh well, Kensai Mage or Kensai Thief is the best class in the game. And don't get me wrong, they're very good, but I don't think they're the best classes in the game. Kai is very good. It does take out the randomness of the attack ranges, so that when you hit, let's say you did dual class to be a thief, and you're trying to get a really powerful backstab off, right? If you do Kai beforehand, you're guaranteed to have that double, triple, quadruple backstab do a huge amount of damage. It's really kind of nice. On its own, the Kensai is good. It's better than lots of other kinds of warriors, but losing armor and losing armor for protection pretty much, and also losing access to missile weapons to allow them to keep their distance is really kind of rough. So just be very careful if you play as a Kensai, but I don't think you're gonna have a good time playing a Kensai. You're not gonna find it to be a very difficult or a very weak character. It's a very good character. Kind of on the other end of that is the Paladin. The Paladin trades a bit of offensive damage for divine buffs and improved saves. They get a natural +2 to all of their saves, and they can wear the armor that the Kensai can't. They're very good for beginner players who want to play as good characters, like me. Paladins' natural protection and healing abilities, even before they get divine casting, gives them a very nice early game advantage above warriors. So they can start the game and they can go pretty far without having access to those divine spells. And they get, if you pop on a nice decent piece of armor on them, you can pretty much have them be kind of your tank and do a pretty good job of it. So I think the Paladin is a nice, it's a relatively simple class. You're going to have higher stats across the board. You're going to have naturally high charisma, high wisdom, which doesn't actually impact the Paladin at all. And I will say they do drop off for their damage later on, because they're not getting the same APR, attacks per round, as the fighter does. But they are still fun to play, and if you pick one up, you will have a good time playing it. On the other side of Paladins are the Blackguards. Blackguards I find to be very similar to Paladins. They just have more clickable abilities and more role-playing flexibility. You can play as a Blackguard and be completely good if you want to be. But you can also play as a Blackguard and, true to their nature, be completely evil. Paladins don't get that advantage. The clickable abilities of the Blackguard are okay, but they aren't too powerful. Blackguards also get nice natural immunities to level drain and to fear. They're good, but I think the other Paladin kits are a little more expansive. So this is not a bad class, but I find it to be interchangeable with Paladins, and it's kind of depending on how you want to play. If you want to be a Blackguard that does like all good and goes across the land, gets those maximum XP and maxes out their reputation, you can do that. If you also want to do them as being completely evil, you can do that too. The next is the Fighter. Just the base fighter. It is the ultimate first-time player class in any RPG, and the cool thing about the fighter is it will stay pretty good throughout the entire game. They have the highest APR, or attacks per round, than they have higher APR than any other class in the game. Their kits benefits from this, even the Wizard Slayer. Now, unlike the Wizard Slayer, they can use most magic items, and unlike the Kensai, the base fighter can wear any armor and use any weapons. They're highly versatile, and they're great at doing damage. Fighters are not unstoppable. They don't get divine protections unless you have a cleric in the party, but they can be fantastic and pretty easy to play. Next is the Undead Hunter. It's a relatively simple and it's an underrated version of the Paladin. They cannot lay on hands. Lay on hands is a healing ability that Paladins get. It only does 2 hit points per level. So a level 10 Paladin is going to heal for 20 points. It's not a huge amount of healing, and the Undead Hunter sacrificing it isn't too bad. But the Undead Hunter in return gets immunity to hold, which is awesome, because hold is pretty much a death sentence for a character, and immunity to level drain, which in my mind is more of a psychological buff. It's very nice to have, but it's not necessarily, you're not going to be using it all the time, but it is nice to have. It's nice to go into like a vampire den and not have to worry about anything draining you. They have bonuses against a super common target, right? Undead are throughout the entire game. You're going to face, right at the beginning of the game, you'll face against skeletons and zombies. Having an undead hunter who's going to do more damage to them just naturally without doing anything else is fantastic. They barely lose anything from the Paladin class, and I think it's well worth trying out. If you've overlooked the Undead Hunter, don't overlook them any longer. Give them a try. I find them to be really good. They were actually my first favorite class of Paladin, but there's another class of Paladin that I think is just a bit better. But the Undead Hunter is really, really good. And the next is the Barbarian. Barbarian, actually, interestingly enough, Barbarian is similar in purpose to the Paladin, but it's a little bit different. They have very good defenses, and slightly less offenses. Again, they're not getting the same APR as other fighters. But instead of divine spells, they don't get to cast any divine spells. They do get their version of Rage that has certain defensive buffs and immunities. Or rather, they have certain immunities. They do lose actually a little bit of AC. In fact, they take an AC penalty, unlike the other fighter kits. So I would say the other fighter kit abilities, which are Kai for the Kensai, Defensive Stance for the Dwarven Defender, and the Berserker's Rage, I actually have to say the Barbarian has the weakest of them because they lose AC, but they do get certain other immunities that make them that you can send them into combat and not have to worry about them so much. Barbarians have immunity to backstab, they have increased HP, and they get to move around a lot faster, which is actually pretty good for defensive capabilities, especially against smart enemy AI. If you're using SCS, a Barbarian is not a bad class to play because enemies will love to use backstab, and they'll love to do like little tricks to maximize you needing to move around. And a Barbarian is really good for that. There's a few small changes I would have loved to see with the Barbarian. I would have loved to see the Rage be even more offensive, but the Barbarian really is a good class. They're a fantastic class. I really enjoy them. They are at the top of the good time tier, because the next class is the start of the awesome tier, which is of course the Cavalier. Now I'm doing an insane difficulty hardcore run of the Cavalier, and it's actually going pretty well. Now the Cavaliers, first for their disadvantage is that they lose missile weapons. That doesn't really affect them because the whole purpose of a Cavalier is to get into combat quickly. They get a ton of immunities and resistances. First off, they're immune to fear, which lets them get close to enemies and allows them to cast remove fear on their allies, and it's a nice little radius, and it can save a group. In fact, it saved a group, has saved my group a couple of times in my insane run. And them being immune to poison makes the early game much different. It lets me face off against opponents that I would not have thought against fighting solo. And so I think that the early game for the Cavalier is really, really quite good. I think maybe they drop off in the later game a little bit, but I mean, you're talking about them having elemental resistances. You're talking about them getting bonuses against some of the deadliest enemies in the game, draconic and demonic opponents. I mean, think about it that way. A base ranger gets favored enemies, and they have to pick one of those. Cavalier gets both, and it makes them an awesome top tier class. Now, the Cavalier has a specific role. It's to get into the melee fight and to inspire everyone. And the fact that sure, it might not be extremely versatile, but unlike someone like the Inquisitor, it's going to be a fun class to play because you're going to have to use strategy to get yourself in and to do some damage. So I really think that the Cavaliers are an awesome class. You should definitely check them out. Now, the next two are actually tied for second. And I tie them for second because it's totally dependent on your playstyle. I'm going to say the Archer is first, but it is tied for second. The Archer is the master of ranged damage per round. They get that bonus every 3 levels to ranged damage. They get the called shot, which isn't super necessary, but it's nice to have. And Archer characters can absolutely wreck opponents, even into the late game. My advice is to give them legendary weapons to help out their skills. Now, this probably means that you have to do a little bit of searching, and you have to really focus on one particular ranged weapon. But the Archer basically takes the specific weaknesses of the Ranger and then gives them purpose, right? Instead of having them not do as much damage as somebody like the Fighter, now they can do that damage. And now they can do range damage, more range damage than a base Fighter can. So it's absolutely fantastic. The Archer is well worth the take. If you've never done an Archer run, I would recommend doing it. The one thing I would say is I think that if you choose your missile weapon, I would go with either crossbows or short bows. Short bows get the advantage of having a legendary weapon that's really good, and you get multiple attacks per round. and the crossbow, you're going to get a nice big hit. There's a really good legendary weapon that you can pick up pretty early in the game. It costs a lot, so you have to raise up your money to get it, but it's definitely worth getting, and it's worth taking crossbows for. So both of those make the archer really good if you focus on one of those two. The next, and also tied for second, depending on your playstyle, is the Dwarven Defender. So with the Dwarven Defender, you have, first off, increased HP. And I didn't mention this with the Barbarian, but both the Dwarven Defender and the Barbarian have 1d12 HP instead of the standard 1d10 HP that most warriors get, or 1d8 if you're a monk, which is the reason why they are not at the top of this list. Dwarven Defenders have that increased HP. They have the defensive stance, which I'll chat about in a little bit, and they are the masters of taking and holding positions. They are not going to move fast when they are in the defensive stance, but that's the whole point, is that they are holding a stance and they are taking the blows and making sure that the rest of your party's faces stay pretty. First off, I wanted to talk real quick about dwarves, right? Dwarves are super underrated as characters. I want to do, for my next hardcore run, I would love to do a dwarven character. I'm thinking about doing a dwarven defender, but I might make him a dwarven bounty hunter instead. I don't know exactly, but they get huge natural saves. They get great stats, especially for fighters. Like if you're a fighter and you are looking to make sure you actually hit really, really hard or stay in the fight for a really long time, dwarves are a fantastic race to be. And defenders, dwarven defenders, can potentially become completely immune to damage quite easily, as long as you don't mind moving very fast when you're in the defensive stance. And even without defensive stance, defenders get resistances to physical damage. By the time you reach level 20, guess what? You're at 20% base resistance. That's without clicking anything, that's without anything. You basically, and that's just all physical damage. So it doesn't matter if it's a +5 weapon or a normal weapon, that's hitting you for 20% less than you would normally get hit by. These guys are great. I could see them being very difficult to kill in the late game and on all sorts of difficulties. And so I think you should definitely give them a try. You should also give the archer a try, because they are just two different playstyles, but they are both second place. They're basically interchangeable between second and third place, depending on your playstyle. Which leads me to the best. In my opinion, the best warrior in the game is the Berserker. The Berserkers they are the most powerful. They virtually get no disadvantage. They, kind of similar to Cavaliers, they're encouraged to get close into combat. They can't specialize in missile weapons, but unlike Cavaliers, they can actually use them. So if you want to give your level 1 Berserker a longbow, 1 point in longbows, because they have 18 strength and they can use it, you can do that and have them build up their other skills along the way. Berserkers, so the Berserker's version of Rage gives them a direct damage buff, which is nice, but it also gives a ton of immunities. I'm not going to list them all, but I'm going to just list a few. Imprisonment is it's an actual death sentence. Level Drain, which is kind of that psychological mindset of, okay, I want to avoid vampires. Hold, which is also a death sentence. Charm, which if you're playing solo, can be an auto end to your party. And Sleep, which is not fun. It's been nerfed a little bit with the spellcasting mod that I have, but it is kind of a nasty spell that you need to be careful of, especially in the early game. And these immunities are all individualized with other classes, right? Like the Cavalier gets immunity to fear and to poison, okay? The Blackguard and the Undead Hunter get immunity to level drain and hold. Okay, the Berserker gets immune to all of it with just a single click. And they could do it several times a day. By the time you're a level 13 Berserker, you can do this 4 times a day. There's lots of times where you're going to be in 1 or 2 fights where you really need this. So the other downside to the Berserker is that when they're winded, they lose a little bit of their efficiency. Yeah, but they're still not fun to deal with in combat, even if they're winded. They don't stay winded for very long. So I just find that the Berserker Rage is just so good. Even if you don't if you're kind of thinking role-playing wise, right? You're not loving the idea of a character going crazy in combat. Just roleplay it differently. Just mentally roleplay it differently. Have your guy basically, tapping into mystical powers or giving themselves like superpowered strength, right? Think of the Witcher drinking his little potion, or Goku going Kaioken, right? It's you're just increasing your strength for a short amount of time and then charging yourself in. There's nothing wrong. There's nothing that specifically forces the Berserker to be an uncontrollable maniac, right? You still have, by the way, have full control of the character. I don't know if that's like a kind of a misperception. We oftentimes think of going berserk as you'll lose control of the character. We think of Minsk, and that's exactly what happens to him. But you don't lose control of the Berserker. They just go straight into combat, and they just have increased damage, and you have full control of them. You can have them retreat if you need them to retreat. So I think that the Berserkers are a great class themselves, and they can also be a great combo class. I know that's not what this list is focusing on, but they can be a really good combo class with just about anything. You can create a Berserker Thief, you can create a Berserker, you could do a Berserker Druid if you want to. You could do a Berserker Cleric, and you certainly could do a Berserker Mage. I mean, imagine a Berserker Mage that also has Stone Skin and Mirror Image. And is immune to a whole bunch of other things. That's insanely powerful. So please don't be fooled by them. Don't be fooled by them and thinking them being a bit brutish or dumb or kind of maniacs. They really are fantastic. They are worth the try and giving them a playthrough. Well, thank you for watching. If you watched all of these ranking videos and are wondering if I'm going to do some sort of overall ranking, I'm sorry to disappoint you, but that's not in the plan right now. The big reason why is that I think that a lot of these rankings are, first off, they're very subjective. And if I were to rank every single class in the game, then there'd be a ton of you who would watch that video. I'm sure a ton of you watch this video and the other ranking videos and think to yourself, Redjoy, you idiot. You totally misranked the swashbuckler. You totally misranked the monk, right? I get it. And the fact that you all give me your support anyway, it just tells me how much high quality people you are. You're like, I'm thrilled. So thank you all so much. But no, unfortunately, I'm not really thinking about us doing a overall class ranking, even my opinion. I'm not completely ruling it out, but it may be something to consider writing and fitting in. Maybe once I reach some sort of benchmark on this channel or something like that. So, if you haven't told your friends to subscribe, go tell your friends to subscribe. So that's gonna be it for today. I hope you enjoyed the video. If you like what I do, give the video a like and a comment, and subscribe to the channel. For now, take care and good luck. We're all counting on you.